Okay, out here on the lake, and we're going to give you brush pile basics. That's right, we're gonna be fishing a brush pile. We're gonna give you the basics, because a lot of people, you talk about, oh, well, so-and-so's fishing brush piles, brush piles, brush piles, brush piles. Man, there is a lot of information out there about brush piles, but nobody's made it basic. So we're gonna do that basic. Step one is that you have to find said brush piles in order to fish them, right? You just can't arbitrarily go out there and just know where they are unless you've put them in there. But we're gonna go out here. I'm going to a couple of community areas on this lake, and we're gonna find some brush piles. We'll show you what they look like on the graphs. I've got hummingbird and Lowrance, and I've got in the down imagery, so you can see exactly what they look like. And you know what? They don't blow you away. It's not, you know, just a huge bush every time. You know, some of the best brush piles that I have ever found and caught fish out of are very subtle brush piles. It might just be like one big branch, or maybe a couple little scrubby looking branches, but that's enough to hold 1 or 2 or 3 fish. You might be surprised what can be on those brush piles. And then we'll kind of give you some other strategies on those later once we start fishing. But we're gonna idle around here. We're gonna look around and show you what a brush pile looks. So let's go do that. There's some brush there. There's all kind of brush right there. You can see it just hitting the highlights of it right there. But that's definitely a big, tall tree standing up. So only 11 feet right there. Then there it is right there. There's a big branch right there. A couple more smaller pieces right there. Okay, so we just idled around a little bit, and we saw that brush pile is one that I knew about, so I kind of knew the area to start looking. So now we're gonna fish it. So we've kind of dialed that in. You saw what that looked like. Now this is not a small brush pile, and it didn't show that it looked huge, but it's a decent sized brush pile. Now we're gonna put the trolling motor down, and we'll give you the basics on how to fish it. Okay, so now we have dropped the trolling motor. We know that this brush pile is kind of out in front of this dock about 20 or 30 yards, and I've got 2 baits in my hand. I am going to pick up one of the 2 of these for every single, or I'm gonna actually pick up both of them for every brush pile, but one of the 2 of these first, and then we'll go to the other one. I mean, both of them can be absolutely the deal, but it depends on the day, depends on the fish, and it depends on the brush pile. So I'm gonna start with the worm here. I like Texas rig. I like a straight worm. When I'm fishing it in the brush pile, I don't like that weight. I like the weight to slide up and down. I think it adds a little extra dimension. I'm gonna make sure my worm is straight. You can either use a ribbon tail or a straight. I like the straight a lot in brush piles. That's a Quiver 6.5. Summertime, red's hard to beat. Watermelon red core. I got it on a bait caster. I like the Texas rig because you can bring it through those branches much better than a shaky head. A shaky head it tends to hang up quite a bit on brush and little small limbs. So that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of a shaky head. Drop shots can be good in brush piles, especially if you use a lighter weight. You know, I'm talking like an 1/8 or even a 3/16 at most. 1/4 ounce in a brush pile with a drop shot, and you're asking to get hung up. Even with the Texas rig bait on there, you're asking to get hung up. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw that Texas rig worm. I got a 5/16 ounce weight. I want at least a 1/4. At least a 1/4. 5/16 is just a tick more than that. I've got, I think, what is this, 14-pound fluorocarbon on here. Not super light, kind of a good intermediate size. And I'm just gonna throw it up there past where I know that brush pile is and drag it out. Now see, I've got 360 and I've got live view. That's like a whole nother video on how to use that stuff to catch fish out of brush piles. The 360 is really nice though, because it can locate that brush pile. You'll know if we sit here for half a second stopped, I can look at that 360 and know which direction, exactly what direction to throw. to get into that brush pile. I'm starting to come into some of those limbs right there. And I'm just gonna slowly drag it through there. And when I get up to one of those limbs with the Texas rig, I might just pull it up and down a few times, give those fish a chance to come to that bait and find it before we catch them. Now, the one thing in this video that gets edited down that I need to comment on is the length of time from the time you idle over a brush pile to the time you fish it. Now, I have seen times to when you idle over a brush pile, you pull around and you make one cast, and that very first cast, there's a super active fish, and your worm doesn't even hit the bottom, or your crankbait doesn't even get to the brush pile. He's on there. Well, I think that's because when you idle over that brush pile, a lot of times it stirs up the brush pile, it triggers them, it gets them active, and it can be actually a good thing to idle over them. I have also seen times when it didn't seem like they wanted you to be anywhere near them. If you got the boat over top of that brush pile, they were not gonna bite. They were not gonna do it. So I think that it goes both ways. It can be a good thing to idle over them, and then again, it can be a bad thing to idle over them. It can spook them, they'll run off, they'll go other places, especially in higher pressured situations. It can be not as good, but if you're in a lake that has a lot of boat traffic, I think boat traffic is good in general for brush pile fishing. I like boat traffic. I think it positions those fish in the brush pile, gets them tighter to the brush, and I feel like that all that commotion puts those fish on notice that something could be happening. Something could be breaking loose. There could be a loose bait fish running around here and there. But I'm dragging this worm through there. I haven't had any bites. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna run off to the next one or run and find another brush pile. That just means I've got to try my other one, my 1-2 punch. You got to have something. This bait goes through there and is very subtle. It's very finessey. Even though we're fishing it on a bait caster, it is definitely on the finesse side. It's not gonna be triggering any vibrations or any triggers to their lateral line. Now, the crankbait, totally different story. This is hands down the best brush pile crankbait I've ever thrown. It's Spro Little John DD70. It runs about 16 to 18 feet deep. So you're just gonna make a good long cast past where you think that brush pile is. Put your rod tip down and start cranking. I like 12-pound Sunline Sniper fluorocarbon. You wanna have, there I was hitting a little piece of it right there. Coming up to a piece right there. It's getting ready to hit the brush. No takers. And I'm gonna bang that brush pile at least 3 or 4 times, if not more, with that crankbait before I move on. It seems like that you really have to trigger those bass in the brush piles. So I'm gonna be banging around with this thing in here a little bit. Now, brush piles are traditionally a summertime deal for me. I have caught some really good fish out of brush piles in the early spring as well. I think they use them as transitions as they're moving shallow. In those situations, a jerkbait is really hard to beat. A jerkbait around these brush piles can bring those fish up out of the brush and eat those, let them eat. Bigger crankbaits, I've not had the success in brush. Now the deeper crankbaits in the spring on rock, different story, but are in the brush, I've just had better luck with the jerkbait, fishing it up over top of it, maybe even a small swim bait. But brush piles definitely can be productive in the early spring, even in the winter time. I feel like that, especially on those sunnier days, they'll suspend around that brush. Now I thought that would have hit. It right there, but it didn't. So I'm gonna cast a little over here to the left, and that's what I'll do. Once I know basically where that brush pile is, I'm gonna cast a little left and a little right. Sometimes your sense of direction can get off just a little bit on exactly where those pieces of brush are. Because man, it just takes that one stray limb off the side that has that big old 3 or 4 pounder hanging around it. Hit that limb just right, man, and it could trigger that big old sucker to eat. So I'm making 5, 6 casts. I'm beating this up pretty good. When I fish a crankbait and a worm through there's all kind of other baits. I mean, there's 100 different baits that can be good brush pile baits. But I'm not going to sit here and throw the whole kitchen sink at them, because from what I've seen in these first 15 casts since we've been fishing and talking here, first 15 casts or so, you're going to know whether those fish are active or not. These fish aren't active. I'm going to pick the trolling motor up. We're going to go run. We're going to go find another one, and we're going to go hit that real quick and see if we can't catch a fish for you. But that's what the brush pile basics is all about, man. Finding the brush piles, turning around, making multiple casts. We want to throw with a worm. You want to throw with a crankbait to be able to hit those brush piles. That is if it's deep enough to be able to utilize the crankbait. If you can't get a crankbait down to the brush pile, you definitely want to have something else get down into that brush pile other than a worm that can hit in there. Now, whether that might be a deep spinner bait, it could be a swim bait on a jig head, something that makes some vibration, that makes some thump, that makes some rattle, getting down there, as opposed to, in conjunction with a worm. You want to make sure you hit them with both. I can't tell you how important that is. That is very important for your brush pile basics. So let's pick this trolling motor up and go find another one. So we saw that monster one right here. So I'm gonna throw the crankbait in there first couple casts, try to go the other way, see if we can't trigger them, make them a little more aggressive to begin with. Threw a little bit too deep on that one. Oh, crushed it. We hit that pile right there. And this is, like we saw, it's pretty good size when you're here. So I'm gonna keep casting around, see what else we can, see if we can hit it a couple more times before we throw that worm in there. Seems to be just right out in front of that dock there. There it is, crushed it. Hit a piece of it there. I'm waiting for this thing to just get bent up. But that's how brush pile fishing can be, man. You make 3 or 4 casts, think that there's nothing there, and then all of a sudden, bam. Fish a little bit deeper. See what happens before we throw that worm in there. But then you might fish 10 brush piles and not get a bite, and then you come to one and catch 2 or 3 in a row, and then the next one you catch one. So you can go from an hour of brush pile fishing not catching anything to bam, you get 3 or 4 good ones and a couple other keepers real quick. So that's just typically how brush pile fishing is. We got a little John action on it. I'm gonna pick the worm up. I hit 2 or 3 of the limbs. I don't feel like I hit the meat of it. I think the meat of it's more out there. Let her sink to the bottom, and then we're just gonna drag it until you feel those limbs up off the bottom. And once you get into one of those limbs, then you can really kind of soak it, milk it. Sometimes that can be the deal. All right, so we've hit 3 brush piles and had no luck so far, but that is definitely the basic way to fish brush piles. You want to find them, you want to be able to hit them with 2 different baits, mix that up, and then go to the next one. Don't spend too much time on one. I don't care who tells you it's the mother of all brush piles and it is the best one ever in life. Hit it, spend 5-10 minutes at most. If you don't get a bite, you're not seeing any activity, you didn't lose any fish, nothing like that, you move on to the next one. You could come back later that same day and catch fish, especially if you lose one or you know it's a really good brush pile or you've caught fish on it. So those are the basics on how to fish brush piles. We'll bring you more advanced stuff later on, but those are the basics. Find them, fish them with at least 2 different baits, and move on to the next one after you're done. So anybody has any comments or any other basic tips, drop them down there in the comments. We want to hear about it. I want to hear about it. So I appreciate you guys watching, and be sure to subscribe.